the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? A tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone, raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
So when you see this classic video clip from Ferris Bueller's Day Off going all the way back to the late 1980s, what do you see as being incorrect or wrong about the way the teacher approached the classroom? I can imagine that you're thinking of the following things. For one thing, the teacher really lacks energy. There's nothing coming off from the teacher that would get you excited or want you to be engaged. Another big one is the lack of movement. He's standing up in front of this chalkboard and hardly moving at all as he's talking to the students. The big one that everybody always notices, and of course the actor did this on purpose, was the monotone voice. There's no varied vocal intonation as this teacher is going through things. Why would you be engaged with what this teacher is saying? And then of course there's the way that he's asking the questions. Students always notice it's closed-ended questions. You're just kind of like guessing at the answers that he could possibly give. Okay, why do we look at this clip from Ferris Bueller's Day Off? I think you know why. It's all about presentations. If somebody's standing up in front of the room and they're hardly engaging with their audience, they're not going to get their message across. And the same is true for you when it comes to speech and debate. So let's get going and find out how you could make your presentation a lot better and not fall into that drooling mess of a massacre of boredom that we saw within Ferris Bueller's classroom. So why do we even care about doing good presentations? I mean, what if you just decide that you never want to do presentations? Or sure, you're on the speech and debate team, but outside of that, like who else would care, right? Well, the truth is you're not going to escape from doing presentations in your life. You kind of know you have to do them at some point, whether it's for a job interview, whether it's in your classes, or hey, let's be honest, if you want to go up and make a friend from somebody. We all know that at some point you've got to confidently present yourself in public. Nobody can get away with that. But we also know that the two biggest fears in life for people are, number one, death, and number two, public speaking. And when they rank those two, most people say public speaking actually is their biggest fear of all. So how do we engage with an audience? How do we make an audience be appealed to and be engaged with what we're doing? I'm going to give you several tips that are going to show how you can make your presentations more engaging and stay away from those boring presentations that we all have heard at some point, whether it's from a teacher, whether it's from a fellow student, whether it's from a priest or a minister on the weekend. We've all been there, we've all known it, and we all know what's going wrong. The question is, how do we make it better? Okay, I'm going to give you 5 tips on how to make your presentations better. Before we do, I want to introduce you to a little bit of foreign language. Yeah, we're going to do a little bit of Greek here for a moment because presentation style has gone all the way back. So the original Greek thinkers, people like Aristotle, and Plato, and Socrates, they came up with this stuff a long time ago. They said there are 2 big things that we want to stress: ethos and pathos. Okay, what are those? Ethos is setting up an environment where people are going to be appealed to. Pathos is the recognition that, if we're going to be honest, most of the time it's not what we're saying that's so important, but how we're saying it and how that comes across to people. In other words, for pathos, how do you manage people's emotions so that they get involved with what you're doing? Here are 5 tips on how you can do that. Tip number 1, varied vocal intonation. This is so important. You know, one of the things students always note when they watch that Ferris Bueller's clip is this: the teacher is boring. He just gives the same vocal intonation throughout his entire presentation. But let's be honest, how many times have we done that up in front of a classroom? I see students do this all the time. I see teachers do this all the time. If you stand up in front of the room and are reading really softly with the same vocal intonation, nobody's going to really care after a while because they don't think you care. Now, you might think that means you ought to be yelling and screaming and no, you don't have to do that. You can talk very softly, but give a lot of intensity. Now, does it mean you have to give intensity throughout your whole speech? Well, no, that would be silly. If you did something like that, people would just think that you're a little crazy and too into the subject matter. What you should do is emphasize the key points. So like when I'm talking right now, I want to get across how important appealing to emotions are. So notice what I did there. I intensified the last part because I knew that that was the most important part. You can almost see it as sort of like a song. As you're talking, you start off low, but you reach that high point. And the high point is intensity. It's not really about being loud. Okay, tip number 2, eye contact. So, eye contact's really important. In fact, in some cultures, they actually say that when you stare into somebody's eyes, you're staring into their soul. That's how important it is. And we kind of know that if you want to get somebody's attention, just look at them in the eyes. I know this as a teacher. When I'm talking in a class and somebody's obviously not paying attention, all I have to do is look into their eyes and they can't look away. Eye contact is really important, not just for speeches, but just in personal contact. If somebody's looking the other way, you don't get a sense that they're really paying attention to what's happening. Now, at the same time, eye contact can be a little creepy. If you keep focusing on one person, they're going to feel like you're just paying attention to them, and then it gets a little odd. So I would suggest something like this. Try the 20-10 rule. 20 seconds of looking somebody in the eye, 10 seconds of looking away. It's pretty simple to do. Now, when you're giving a presentation in front of a classroom, what you can do is scan the room. What I mean is this, and I do it all the time. Start on the right side of the room and choose one person to look in their eyes. Then move to somebody in the middle of the room, then somebody on the left-hand side of the room. And scan again with somebody else on the right, middle, and left side of the room. If you just have a judge in the back of the room, do that 20-10 second rule. But make sure to get their eye contact. It makes sure that they have attention. Tip 3 is posture. This is so important. I remember when I was a kid, teachers used to talk about this all the time. Whenever I would slouch over in my desk just because it felt more comfortable, they would always say it's so important to sit up straight. Make sure you have your chest puffed out. And I always thought that's crazy. What does it matter? But now I know how important it is. When you walk around as you're talking to other people, if you have your back up straight, your chest puffed out, people get a sense that you have a little bit more confidence. And they're going to pay attention to you more. When you're doing a presentation in front of the room, it's so important you have the same. By standing up straight and having your chest puffed out, you give a sense that you are confident in what you're saying and you have a message that people ought to listen to. Tip number 4 is hand gestures. Hand gestures are really important. Why? Well, because people tend to be very visual. And when somebody gives a hand gesture, what that tells them is this is an important point. And we don't want to overdo it. I had a student once who kind of mocked it. And I don't know if they were mocking it, they just didn't get the point. And so they decided that they wanted to take my hand gesture issue seriously. So as they did their presentation, they were going like this the entire time.
Oh no.
If you do that, then you're just distracting people's attention. You want to use hand gestures to really emphasize specific points. Now, typically, the best hand gesture you can do is a simple one. All you have to do is basically have your hand out like this and just point at the person. We do that today because if you point somebody's finger like this, it comes across as rude. So if you have your hand out like this with your finger on top, that gives a sense of being able to point things out. But that's not the only way to do it. In fact, I do it in a variety of ways. You're seeing as I'm doing it right now, how I'm doing hand gestures. When I make a point, I want my hands to tell the story. By doing that, I keep people's attention. Tip number 5. So this is probably the most important point that I can tell. Whenever you do anything, I don't care if it's a speech or if it's doing a project or if it's doing an assignment, you always have to ask yourself the why. What do I mean by that? Why are we doing this? What's your big purpose? People are not really motivated after a while by things like grades or money. I know you're like, yeah, they are. But if you think about it, after a while, that gets really dull. If all you ever care about is concrete rewards like grades, money, or the win in the debate, after a while that becomes very difficult, especially when those things don't come forward. But if there's a why, if there's a passion, if there's a meaning behind what you're doing, that's going to drive you a lot more. The why is what keeps us going. And the why is your reason for what you're doing. What's the story you're trying to get across? Whether it's a presentation in class or a debate, everything has a story. By story, what I mean is a beginning, a middle, and end. How do you set up the context? What do you say about the meat of the presentation? And then, especially in debates, how do we get to the big impacts and how do we weigh them? So let's wrap this all up. Why is presenting so important? Again, you might look at this and just say, who cares? I don't really want to present in the future. Maybe you just want to do a job or you can sit in an office someday and just crunch out numbers. So why should you care about this? Because at some point in your life, you're going to have to present. Whether it's in a classroom, whether it's for a job interview, or whether it's making friends, you have to confidently present. And here's the great news about it. If you learn how to confidently present, you feel better about yourself. You feel more confident because you express the why. You express the story that is behind what you're trying to do. Whether it's in a debate, a presentation in a class, or just presenting yourself so that you can earn friends and feel like you belong to a place that you want to belong to. It's really important that you learn how to be confident in yourself, and presentations are all a part of that. Thanks. See you in class.